Day 1. You're dragging a couch across your own living room to block a front door you've locked 1,000 times before and never once thought about like this. Hands shaking. Not from fear exactly. More like your body hasn't caught up yet with what your eyes just watched happen on the street outside your window. You tell yourself this is temporary. You tell yourself help is already on the way, that somewhere out there, people in uniforms are already fixing this. You have no idea yet that the voice on the radio, the one giving calm instructions and asking everyone to stay inside, is about to cut to static and never come back. Actually, no. Forget the couch against the door, because the door was never actually the danger tonight. Whatever's out there in the street, moving wrong, breathing wrong, that's not the thing that's going to determine whether you're still alive in 2 months. That part gets decided quietly, alone, inside your own head, long after the screaming outside has stopped. So here's the real question, and it's about to sound completely insane. Nobody has ever actually documented surviving a zombie outbreak because it's never happened. But people have documented surviving almost the exact conditions it would create: total isolation, a supply of food that has to last far longer than it should, no outside contact, and a very specific, very real point where the human mind starts to fracture under all three at once. Those records exist, they're detailed, and they tell you almost exactly what day 30 and day 60 are actually going to feel like. Between September 1941 and January 1944, the city of Leningrad was surrounded and cut off, and nearly 3 million civilians were trapped inside with dwindling food and no way out for 872 days. At the worst point, in the winter of 1941, the daily bread ration for ordinary residents dropped to 125 grams, roughly the size of a deck of cards, and that bread itself was stretched with sawdust and cellulose just to make the flour last longer. People burned furniture, floorboards, and books for heat once the fuel ran out. Some boiled leather belts and wallpaper paste because the paste was made from a flour base, and however little nutrition it held, it was calories. And through all of it, people kept diaries, went to work, kept informal trading networks running between neighbors, because the ones who organized their days around small routines were consistently the ones who made it through. At almost the same time, on a completely different kind of frozen isolation, scientists began studying what happens to people who spend entire winters completely cut off in Antarctic research stations, months of total darkness, no possibility of evacuation, the same small group of faces every single day. Researchers documented a real, recurring phenomenon they started calling the Antarctic stare, a kind of blank, unfocused withdrawal that sets in after weeks of isolation, along with genuine insomnia, irritability, and short-term memory lapses, all from nothing more than prolonged confinement with no new input. You don't actually have to reach back that far. Sound familiar? Every one of those survivors, in Leningrad, in Antarctica, and in a bedroom in 2020, protected their mind the same specific way. They built a schedule and defended it like it was rationed food, because unstructured time is where despair moves in fastest. They kept a task, however small, a diary entry, a chore, a trade with a neighbor, because a mind with a job left to do has less room to spiral. And this is where the real question I promised you actually gets strange. In 1916, the explorer Ernest Shackleton and 2 companions crossed 32 miles of uncharted glacier-covered mountains on South Georgia Island with almost no supplies, in a desperate final push to save the rest of his stranded crew. All 3 men later said, independently and without prompting, that they had felt a 4th presence walking with them the entire way, guiding them though no 4th person existed. It wasn't a one-time story. Mountaineers have reported the same thing on solo descents from Everest and Nanga Parbat. Certain a climbing partner who wasn't physically there was checking their footing on the ice. Survivors pulled from the collapsed towers on September 11, 2001, described an unseen presence steering them toward stairwells through smoke and debris they couldn't see through. Researchers eventually gave the pattern a name, the third man factor, after finding it again and again, in people who had no reason to know anyone else had ever felt it too. Relax a little, though, because that's not a haunting. It's your own brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Under extreme prolonged stress, the mind sometimes generates the sensation of a companion, and researchers believe it functions as a genuine survival mechanism, something to keep moving toward, something that makes the next impossible step feel less alone, even when it's manufactured from nothing but your own will to keep going. Here's the twist, though. The people who lasted longest in the siege and on the ice and on that mountain weren't the toughest or the most self-sufficient. They were the ones who kept some version of connection alive, real or imagined, a routine shared with a neighbor, a diary addressed to someone, a fourth man who wasn't really there but somehow still counted. Isolation is the actual threat. Company, in whatever form the mind can manage to build, is the actual defense. You're back at the door on day 1, dragging the couch into place, except this time you already know what day 30 tastes like, rationed and careful, and what day 60 sounds like, quiet in a way that starts to talk back if you let it, the same way it did for a city under siege, for scientists sealed in the dark for a winter, for 3 exhausted men crossing a mountain who swore there were 4. You were never actually going to be alone. Your mind was always going to make sure of that.